Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. My guest is Daniel Barber. So Daniel, if you could introduce yourself and a little bit about the company and just let everyone know.
Lovely. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, excited to be on the show. Daniel Barber, CEO and co-founder of Datagrail. A industry-leading privacy platform helping modern brands reduce risk and build trust with their consumers, users, and everyone they share personal information with.
All right. We could go 1,000 directions. We could talk a long time about privacy and various things. There's the ongoing sort of. I want to say it's sort of the elephant in the room, sort of the unspoken thing. Well, actually, everyone speaks about it, but even though companies will say over and over again, they're not listening, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. I'm like, there's so much anecdotal evidence of. I just had a conversation, with someone in my kitchen about something. I never searched for it online. I didn't type it into a browser, and all of a sudden I start seeing ads for it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but you got someone's got to explain how that happens.
Yeah, I think part of this is what led us to found the company, Tony. To be honest, it's I think as technologists we realize that data is spanning such a significant number of applications and stores within an organization, and we really have got to a point where we expect privacy as a human right. And people are, taking control and looking to take control of their personal information. But in reality, businesses in many respects have lost control of the information that they've actually been collecting on you and I. And so some of the things you joked about there, businesses are trying to wrap their hands around the privacy risk they have and what that actually means from a business standpoint of what is my business risk and how do I assess that of the different ways we're collecting your information? Really, it really is about protection of our information at its core. We founded the company because of some of the things you described, that consumers are now expecting this transparency into how their information is being used, and that trend is not slowing down, which we're seeing it manifest itself in a bunch of different ways across large organizations and small organizations within the industry.
Well, I guess, from my own perspective, I think it comes down to a word you used at the beginning of that, which is just control. Well, it's two words you use, control and transparency, because fundamentally, I'm okay sharing my data with the organizations I choose to share my data with, because there's a give and take. Like, I turn on stuff on my iPhone because there's a benefit to that. Like, if I could turn off a bunch of stuff and I would lock down my privacy more, but there's a trade-off of the features and capabilities that you get from sharing that information. And so right. I'm willing to engage in that transaction and say, okay, yes, you can have access to this data because you're giving me this in return.
That's right.
But A, I have control over it, and B, I believe they're being transparent about it. I guess you can never know what they're not being transparent about. But but I have a relative level of confidence with Apple in particular that I trust them not to do shady things with my data.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept, right? I think they've built a strong brand position of trust in this area, and they've been very vocal about that in the way they advertise over the last 12 to 24 months with commercials and positions around privacy of privacy is a core fundamental within Apple, and to your point, you've now got this perception of transparency that's been created as a result of that. Whether that's true or not, to your point, I do think that there's a desire from consumers like you and I to understand where the information is being shared, right? So you mentioned they're giving access to your information, but does it actually go to anyone else, right? So if I share my phone number at the petrol pump and yes, I'm Australian, I will say the petrol pump. If I share my phone number to get that 5% discount on petrol, where does my phone number go, right? I know that it's going to Shell, but who else is it getting shared with? That's unclear, right? And I think providing better visibility into that, not just when you're interacting physically with businesses, but also when you're arriving at a business's website, which today may have hundreds of applications that are processing your personal information, even just upon arrival. And we're seeing that in, governments trying to also step in on perhaps how businesses are processing your personal information, particularly now with, folks using AI platforms or using, different methods of collecting personal information, like companies like TikTok, for example.
Yeah. Well, so, way back, one of my first jobs in IT was, network admin for a .com startup. And we had a bunch of users. People would come to the website, they would fill out forms. We gathered all this data. And that was at a time when storage was at a premium. We didn't have what we have today. There was no cloud.
Right.
So I had to actually buy hard drives if I wanted to store this information. And I went to the CEO and was like, hey, we need to come up with a plan for when are we going to what's the cutoff to deprecate this stuff and just purge stuff that's old. And his response to me, he was ahead of his time when it comes to data analytics and stuff. His response was, we're not getting rid of any data. He's like, and I was like, well, why? What are you going to use it for? He said, I don't know yet. He said, but if I come up with an idea in a year and we've gotten rid of the data, I can't do anything about that. But if we just have the data, we can figure out how to look at it later. And that's very true. It's there are things that you might not think of right now, but maybe 4 months from now you have a question and you go, oh, well, I can go back and I can look at this pool of data through a different lens. I can look at it this way. I can derive valuable business insights from this data. So I get that, and I also do understand. So aside from the thing I said about trading my location information for some convenience and things like that, and from a mobile phone perspective, I also do have some appreciation for targeted advertising. I get that advertising is a thing. It's what makes the whole world run. Someone's got to pay someone advertising dollars in order to make these things available. And if you're going to show me ads anyway, they may as well be ads that are remotely relevant to me. I mean, you could just show me anything.
Right.
But I guess I would rather them know, okay, well, Tony likes this and Tony likes that, and Tony was just searching for this, so let's show him those things. The one thing I would say they need to fix in that regard, and we've been talking about this for years and years and years, is just if I go on Amazon and I look up a specific pair of shoes, let's say, then for the next month I get ads for that exact same pair of shoes. And I'm like, okay, well, either A, I bought them already because I went to Amazon and looked at them, or B, I looked at them and decided I didn't want them. But whatever it is, yes, take the intelligence you gathered, and you know that I was interested in these shoes, but then show me similar shoes, show me things that go with shoes, show me adjacent items, but don't just show me the exact same thing I already looked at, because I already looked at it.
Yeah. So your first comment about the ongoing use of data and finding new uses for data down the road, I always joke with folks, especially folks in the legal and security field, that are trying to empathize with marketers and understand why marketers would want this information. If you've ever asked a marketer, hey, can I? Are you comfortable if we delete, the set of emails or phone numbers that we've collected? You'll always get a hard no. And it's for the reason that you just described. The use of that information may not be understood at this point in time, but you might find a use for it down the road. And that's why data minimization as a construct is great in theory, and companies should aspire to collect less information on individuals, because obviously it's if it's not necessary, they shouldn't house it. However, the the concept of removing information will never be popular with a marketer because they may find new uses for that information. So I couldn't agree more with your comment, the first point. I think the second point around advertising is interesting. And it's really about relevancy, right? If the message is relevant for you, then you're far more likely to engage with the message. Now, what's interesting that you shared there, right, is you're comfortable with advertising being relevant for you. In fact, it's probably annoying if it's not relevant. And I think that's where we've actually arrived at, in that we are comfortable with sharing our information to create increased relevancy. We just need to know that we also have control over it. And so I think, if in the event that we do want to remove our information, or we do want to understand how the information is being used, this mechanism should exist. And that's frankly what we've been seeing in the market since 2018, since we first started the company. And now, again, it's resurfaced in research that we've recently put out around increasing expectations of the consumer, you and I, around our personal information.
Well, I guess let's segue and talk about that a little bit. So let's dig in a little bit on the survey. So I guess first of all, can you talk about who did you survey?
Yeah, so Datagrail, the product, we provide a few different things for businesses. Namely, we help to understand the privacy risk that a business has. Secondary to that, and so I should say, in that first area, we understand the systems, processes, and people that are involved with collecting, using, sharing personal information. So identifying the unknown risk in an organization around the information that's being collected. The secondary area is if you or I were to contact a business and say, hey, I'd like to understand what information you have about me, or I'd like to delete the information you've collected about me. And regulations like the GDPR or California's Consumer Privacy Act, these regulations have this ability. So you have privacy rights now. And so as a result of that, we have collected data on who is making these requests, not specifically the individual, but where are these requests coming from? What type of growth have we seen in these requests? What type of requests are people asking for? Are they asking for deletion of their information? Are they asking for to understand where their information is being shared? And so we put out a report this year, and we've done this now for 3 years. So this is the third year that we've been running this reporting. And what we found is that 52% of people that made requests for either their information to be shared with them or their information to be deleted were actually in states that didn't have privacy protections. 52%. So what this tells you, the volume of people that are making these requests, they're coming from states that are not protected. Now that's very interesting because that suggests that the increase of awareness around privacy and the increase of expectation has got to a point that we don't have a federal privacy bill in the United States. And so it doesn't actually matter. The regulation is actually less interesting. It's that consumers, you and I, have now got to a point where we are curious about how businesses are using our information. And that is showing up in the data around how many people are actually making these requests. So it's less about regulation and compliance, rather consumers' expectations, people's expectations about their information. And that's why businesses are, making investments to try to address this expectation by people.
Okay. It is interesting. But I mean, it's interesting from the perspective as well that there's this, based on the survey, there's an awareness of the concept of privacy, even though it doesn't technically exist for you per se.
For that person. Yeah, that's right. Someone in Montana doesn't have privacy rights, but they are submitting privacy requests and businesses are adhering to those requests. What I'd also say that's interesting is that the volume of this type of request on a per capita basis increased 72% year over year. So not only are we seeing states like Wisconsin, for example, with high volumes of privacy requests per capita, in fact, higher than almost any other state, and that state has no privacy protections today, to be clear, or limited. But the volume of privacy requests across the country has increased 72% year over year.
Okay. Well, being in the cybersecurity space, I've covered a spectrum of compliance stuff. I actually co-wrote PCI compliance many years back.
There you go. Yeah.
So you got SOX, GLBA, HIPAA, all these things. GDPR, I do think, stands out as one of the most effective and widely respected. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of compliance things it's like, okay, well, now I've got a bunch of bureaucracy. I've got extra forms, extra work. But in the end, being compliant doesn't get me anything or whatever. It's just kind of an annoyance. GDPR seems to be one of the few that has actual meat to it, actual teeth, as evidenced by the recent fine against Facebook. I mean, basically, the European Union does not mess around with privacy.
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, our European friends have been leading the efforts around privacy of what Europeans would describe as data protection, right? So it's a different term often used throughout the European context. And I actually like it, right? This concept of data protection is quite good. It's protecting people's information. I think you mentioned a couple of points there that are interesting. GDPR, it hits 5, right? In fact, tomorrow. So we're doing an interesting recording today on the eve of the 5th anniversary of the GDPR. We launched our first product offering on the day of GDPR going into effect, May 25th, 2018. And so, has a special symbolic meaning for me. But I think it was a watershed moment. I think why you may be feeling the effectiveness and see the effectiveness more than other, perhaps, areas of what I would call sort of compliance, is because we have the expectation of privacy as a human right. And that goes further than perhaps other areas have. And I think the European regulation really followed, if you think about Cambridge Analytica and that period in 2015, 2016, just serious mistrust of how companies could use our personal information. But the GDPR followed a piece of regulation that even predated this, which was the EU Privacy Directive of '95. So it goes back quite a long time. And so I would say that Europeans have been leading the way for quite a while. It opened up other states in the US, right? So California quickly followed with the California Consumer Privacy Act, within months of the GDPR going into effect. And again, I really think this is just because consumers have become aware and they have expectations and they vote ultimately, right? The regulations that go into effect, like the GDPR or CCPA, are really just a reflection of the constituents' expectations around how their data is protected. And so, I think your other comment there of, compliance being sort of this byproduct, I would agree that businesses need to, as a result of the GDPR, now make investments in their privacy program, into their security program, into their legal program, to ensure that they're meeting the expectations of the consumer, which ultimately means that they're on their path to some form of GDPR compliance.
Agreed. I feel like in some cases, and again, I'm kind of going back to when I was on the network admin side. So technology has changed a lot since I've been in the trenches. But I almost feel like, especially now with cloud services and SaaS applications, and you've got so much more opportunity now for shadow IT, and if someone can just go start a service, I can go to SurveyMonkey and create a form and just start collecting data.
That's right.
And so now if I'm the company and you say, okay, well, hey, I need to know what data do you have on me and what are you doing with it? Can I even confidently answer that question? Like, I can only tell you, I can tell you, here's the data that I know I have on you.
Yeah. I mean, so Tony, that's interesting, right? That's another one of the core reasons why we founded the company. What we noticed was, people were doing these exercises for data mapping, right? So data mapping is the exercise of going around to the company and asking all of the people that could have personal information or might have, to your point, spun up a SurveyMonkey environment and start sending out surveys, all the people that could do that activity. Well, that would actually really be all the employees to a degree, right? Or at least the employees that have administrative rights to install new applications. Now, the problem with that construct is that shadow IT marketers can go and spin up, applications on the website, or human resources might go and install a new piece of software to try out background checks in a different way than they were before. And this is a problem. It's a wonderful opportunity for software and the development of software, but it is a problem in that, protecting people's personal information, which was where we started, right, becomes very, very challenging. And so when people go through a manual data mapping exercise, we often see they only capture about 50% of the applications that they are aware of. So if I went and asked you, hey, what are all the applications you have? In most cases, it only captures about 50% because the organization, there are so many pockets of other people that have spun up software that are not being captured in that manual method, that businesses really need an automated way or an intelligence method for finding out the applications that do contain personal information, so they are getting a represented picture to you if you were to request, because it's not as simple as it sounds.
For sure. I mean, in various facets of IT, I often come back to the premise of you can't prove a negative. So like when I talk to vendors, who a few years back, it was like all the rage, and the big trend was everyone talking about how they were the ones who were going to give you, total visibility of everything. And I would say, okay, well, great, you're this is a problem, and you're solving the problem, and now I have more visibility. But what you can't guarantee me is that I have all visibility, like, because even you don't know what you don't know. I'm like, so I can look at the delta. I can say I used to know this, and now I know this, and it's more, but I still don't know what's on the other side of that.
That's right. I mean, that's why, people invested in things like CASB solutions, right? CASB as a concept to listen to the network and try to find out, what type of signals we can learn from the network. That's why people make that investment. So it is about the business trying to get back in control of what is going on, and what type of data is being collected. And we're seeing that trend. That's why we founded the company, and why I'm excited to always talk about this topic, to be honest.
Well, in that vein, this is about when it comes to like rogue assets and shadow IT and such. I think that the trend somewhat is, when these things are out there. So if you've got, assets that you don't know about and you don't have visibility of them, the problem is all you need is for a threat actor to find it, and it's not protected because you didn't even know it was there, and now they have access to your network. So the logical answer to this is, okay, well, I just need to do I need to regularly look at my network like an attacker would. Like the same tools they would use to scan my network, I should be scanning my network with. The same, the same things that threat actors are doing to find the holes in my network. And I know I'm making a big case for, like, say, penetration testing as a service. And I'm not trying to propose like one solution. I'm just saying, as a concept, it behooves organizations to either think like a threat actor or use the same tools threat actors would use to try to figure out, okay, what is visible? What could I find if I wanted to poke holes in this network?
Yeah, that's right. I agree with a lot of what you just shared there, because I do think that businesses, especially how they're approaching privacy, if it is entirely a legal-driven activity, right? So legal only is approaching the problem, they're probably going to fail. And I say that pretty confidently after seeing hundreds of organizations do this, because in reality, the best approach is not just thinking about it as a legal problem, also thinking about it as a technology problem, and not just a technology problem, really a security challenge. Engineering and security are often conflated, but in reality, security's job is to protect the information. So what you're talking about is protecting the information, right? And protecting the personal information is really privacy. So it's one level removed, but it's the same problem. And so that's why I think the best organizations that we see, you've got security teams and legal teams and privacy groups really working together to try to solve this problem. Because if one group is operating in isolation, it's unlikely to be successful, because you do need cross departmental support, and frankly, that's why it's been a challenge for folks, I would say, over the last few years, and probably will continue to be, because you've got a requirement of working across teams.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's in the broader sense for cybersecurity in general, there is a need to work cooperatively with other teams and not just try to impose security. But when we're talking about data and data governance and privacy and compliance, the challenge, as you just described, is there's a legal component, there's also an IT component, there's also a security component, there's also a compliance component. And a lot of people might think, oh, well, compliance, that's just a function of security. And it's like, well, no, it's not. I view compliance through a security lens because I'm a security person, but there's a lot of elements of compliance, depending on which framework you're talking about, like SOX and PCI and things like that. There's a lot of elements of compliance that have nothing to do with IT security. I mean, they're business compliance. So, so there's a compliance team and a legal team and an IT team and a security team, and all of those teams have a stake. They all have a vested interest in data governance and privacy.
Yep. No, couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I'd say that's where we see the best organizations are tying those things together. And ultimately, it is about trust, right? Like that's where it goes to, because you're trying to build trust with the people that you've collected personal information on. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah. One thing, and maybe your survey went into this, and if not, maybe it's something to think of for the next survey. So you talked about how there's an increase in people asking for asking for their data, or what you're doing with their data, or deleting their data, and there's more attention being paid to that in general. At the same time, I go to any website, and the first thing that pops up is, do you want to accept these cookies? And by default, I, and probably most people in the world, I feel like, simply click yes. Like I don't go in and read their policy. I don't go in and check, okay, well, let's turn these cookies on and these cookies off, even though that is an option that's offered most of the time. Is you can fine tune it and say, okay, well, I'm good with these cookies, but not these. I'm like, I don't have time for all that crap. I just click yes. I'm just trying to buy dog food, let's move on. And so there seems to be a somewhat of a disconnect there. On the one hand, we're saying, hey, people are more aware about privacy and they're interested in knowing what's going on, and they want to know what's going on, what you're doing with their data. And on the other hand, companies are literally giving people the option to know what's going on with their data and to have some control over it. And the default response is to just click yes and go on.
Yeah, so you bring up such an interesting sort of paradox, right? You've got, it's one we talk about a lot internally at the company. I do think that the EU privacy directive, which, or I should say, actually, the use of cookies is related to e-privacy in that directive, but people always associate it with the GDPR. So the timing is very close there. And so there's a connection. The GDPR is a cookie banner, and unfortunately, it's not that simple. But really, when you think about the interaction of you going to the website trying to buy dog food, you probably don't need control there in that particular scenario. Rather, you need a way for the business to know who you are, and if you're visiting again for the second time, you don't need that control and that transparency populated. And if you're a regular subscriber and you've been engaged in their loyalty program, it doesn't make sense for the business to showcase that cookie banner to you. So I would agree the consumer experience is really poor in this area. And frankly, I think the market needs to respond with methods of doing this better. The legal construct was set up to, again, yeah, you're right, try to provide control to the consumer, but the consumer is not going to read a 36-page privacy policy before they enter a website to buy dog food.
Right.
Right? That's just not going to happen.
It's similar to the EULA. Like the EULA, is supposed to be a legal agreement between me and the provider, the vendor, to say, hey,
yep.
This is what you're agreeing to. I'm like, I've never once read an EULA.
Yeah. So, I think we owe it to ourselves, because we all interact with websites, right? To provide a better experience. And so I think, the market will adjust. I don't think anyone's happy with the current experience today. And so, I'd expect that we will see, better ways of interacting with websites, because what you just described is not it.
Right.
So, yeah.
I had a thought. I want to I want to kind of jump way back to the beginning, to the notion of my CEO when I was working at the .com saying, hey, we want to save all of this data because who knows how we might use it in the future.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I feel like there is a difference in how that data could be used, in terms of, I think personally, I would be okay with an organization amassing just huge amounts of data, as long as it's anonymized, because because if the questions you're trying to ask are, what do white males living in Texas, like that is a different question than saying, what does Tony Bradley want? So it's if you take the personal aspect out of it, now I get that doesn't help the Googles of the world who are trying to target ads specifically at Tony Bradley. But you can break demographics down and say, okay, well, let's look at age groups. Let's look at, ethnicity, whatever, all the different ways you can demographically break down data. I think there's you can derive value from the data without making it personal.
You definitely can. This is an ongoing discussion as well. I'd say there's folks in the privacy community advocating for anonymization of information and methods to safely and securely transfer value within data in an anonymized state. I think that there is a world where that becomes a reality in some construct, especially in really super sensitive information like medical records and things of that nature. I would say that businesses are not there yet, right? So we're still making the migration from on-premise into the cloud, and that journey is just now really kicking into gear. And so from where we sit, I would say it's unlikely that is something that we see, at least in the next decade. Just given the speed at which businesses have made the cloud transformation, it seems unlikely that they would move to completely anonymized systems, given where we are.
Well, and kind of going back to the transactional nature of granting access to the information, where I'm okay with my trade-off with Apple, but when I go to Walgreens and CVS, I don't participate, because my wife does. Right. And I'm like, they're always like, well, do you want to do this thing? Because then, you can, you'll get something. I'm like, you never give me anything back. I get that you want to know what is Tony Bradley buying and how often is he buying it. And so you're getting all kinds of data on my shopping habits and what I want. I'm not getting anything out of this arrangement. Like, what are you giving me? Like a $1 off coupon once a year?
Yeah. That trade for information is opaque in certain situations. I think this is probably one of them.
Yeah. Well, so we're kind of towards the tail end of the conversation, but I wanted to go a little bit more into, like, do you want to share something like a little bit more specific about the Datagrail platform? Like, how do you solve this problem for a company?
Yep. So we built a next generation privacy solution. We felt that the market wasn't addressed by some of the manual methods that we talked about earlier, and so the product can kind of be broken down into a few areas. One, we have a patented method of understanding the types of applications that exist in an organization, what type of information those are processing. So we call that the live data map, and that is a method for businesses to understand their privacy risk, try to put structure around what they're defining. Secondary to that is what I described around retrieval, deletion of information for consumers. So when people make requests, this product area we call the request manager. And then the third area, this is something that we're really excited about, we just released in October of last year, is really around the reduction of privacy risk. And that begins with assessments. So things like data protection impact assessments or privacy impact assessments. These things are tools that security, legal, privacy groups will try to use to reduce the privacy risk in their organization. And so we leverage an integration network of over 2,000 different integrations. So everything I described is sort of underpinned by the largest integration network of different applications in the industry. So the Datagrail integration network. And that provides an intelligence layer to sort of surface some of the things we just talked about. So we've been doing this for coming up 5 years now. Business is just over 100 employees. We've raised just under $85 million. And folks like Salesforce, Okta, and Restoration Hardware have been using the platform for a number of years.
Very nice. One kind of other question that occurred to me earlier when we were talking about GDPR and then CCPA is, I every once in a while I hear about other legislation being considered. It comes, someone will say, hey, someone's introducing a bill here, here or there. Do you feel like that will come to pass, or that it needs to come to pass, or are GDPR and CCPA enough? And the reason I ask that is because, I'm in Texas, not really by choice, but I'll get out of here fast enough. I'm in Texas, and Texas makes decisions about what they do or don't want in like school curriculum, and those decisions end up impacting the entire nation. Because then when you're the publisher, you say, well, if I have to, Texas is a big market. So if I have to publish my book to meet the Texas requirements, I'm just going to publish one book for the whole country. So everyone gets Texas requirements.
That's right. Yeah.
California also has that same sort of power when it comes to, requirements. So, So even though we don't have a federal privacy rule, the California privacy rule sort of acts as a surrogate for the federal privacy rule, because most companies then will say, well, we're going to do what California said.
Yeah. So we've got a handful of other US states that have passed or are passing similar regulation. To your point, they do model in many respects the CCPA, but this patchwork of regulation creates enormous challenge for businesses because, frankly, if the requirements are slightly nuanced, which in some cases they are, that's really annoying for a business to actually deal with because, they set themselves up for, to your point, a default standard. And now that default standard is nuanced, right? So I would say that the consumer, frankly, has an expectation, and those expectations have been clear for a while. Transparency and control was one of the first, two words that you used as we kicked off our conversation today. We've seen that for a while. I think that we are due for a federal privacy bill to create some conformity in the way that businesses need to adhere to these regulations. So while I agree that California sort of started a standard, the deformity of the regulations now in these different states actually is a problem. We need to unite the states around a federal set
which
the businesses can adhere to, which makes sense.
That it does make sense. But I would also say, and this is a slightly separate topic, but businesses can just choose to do the right thing. So a business
that is
in
the thing.
Theory,
Yes.
a business in theory could say, hey, this is what people want for privacy.
And
this is
that's
what they
what
expect.
our data
I can
shows.
just do that without the government telling me I have to do that. And there's a definite disconnect there from the free market capitalists, actually, when it comes to that. Because on the one hand, they'll say, well, we don't need government regulation, let the market govern itself. And it's like, okay, great. So let it. And then they'll turn around and say, well, I don't have to do X, Y, Z. I don't have to give you clean water because the government didn't make me. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. If you're telling me the government needs to make you do something, then I'm going to have the government make you do something. If you can't make a choice that's in the best interest of the country and the community, then we'll tell you how to make that choice.
Yeah, and I think that's what our report showed, right? The 52% of people that don't have privacy rights in their state acting with, in their own manner to get access to the information that is theirs from their perspective, and businesses actually delivering on that. Now, they can deliver on that because they've made investments to do so. To be clear, we see a number of companies that come to us that are not operating that way because they can't. The mechanical requirements for doing what is asked, to your point, the right thing is too difficult alone. They need partners. That's why we exist. But you're actually spot on. The 52% of people that don't have privacy rights acting and getting access to their information should suggest exactly what you just shared, that businesses are trying to do the right thing in most cases. But we should see federal privacy regulation to simplify the process, because otherwise it just gets too complicated.
Right. All right. Well, that's all the questions I had. Feel free if you have any other closing thoughts.
No, this has been fun, Tony. I think it's a debate that's ongoing. It's a topic that's clearly meaningful to all of us. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and look forward to talking soon.
One other thought on that is just that I would say it's one of those things where there isn't a one answer. Like my relationship with my data and privacy is subjective, and like what I'm willing to share, like I said, I'm willing to share with Apple. I try not to share with Google. I have kids who use Android phones instead. They have no qualms with sharing their stuff with Google. I mean, it's a subjective thing.
It is.
And so it's hard to paint with like one brush and say, well, this is how we're going to do this. It's like, well, it comes back to like we said, it comes back to control and transparency. It's not a matter of saying every company must do data like this. It's a matter of saying every company must be transparent about what they're doing with the data and give some amount of control to the individual to say whether or not they want to participate in that transaction.
That's exactly right.
So, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me and taking the time.
That was awesome.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.